Start. So we all made it to 2024. Isn't that amazing? Very fortunate. So while reciting the prayers, let's wish happiness for all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have a happy new year and every year, and wish them all to be free of suffering and its causes. I wish them to have every kind of happiness all the way up to awakening. Although it's not likely that'll happen this year, but eventually, sooner or later, and we can at least, wish that and create the causes for that. So let's think of all sentient beings as we recite these prayers and have them in our hearts as we're doing this this final session this morning.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger.
So take a few minutes to refresh, renew the altruistic motivation you generated earlier this morning, and think that is your reason for being here, joining this session, is to be of benefit to others as much as possible. And if you're comfortable with the idea, to work for enlightenment, becoming fully enlightened, fully awakened, to help all beings in the best way. So there were a couple of questions that were in the chat box from online students following yesterday. And a couple of the questions were about rejoicing in non-virtue, and how does that compare to actually doing the non-virtuous action? And I did try to find something definite, but in volume 2, the Foundation of Buddhist Practice, the only thing it said was rejoicing is tantamount to that non-virtue. And the word tantamount is a little unclear, if it's exactly the same or almost the same or 9/16 the same, or it's yeah. So I can't say for sure, but I don't think it matters that much. I think the important thing is don't do it. Just try to avoid rejoicing in non-virtuous actions that other people do or that you yourself do. That's also something that can happen. We do something naughty and then we feel good about it and want to do it again. So that's not a good thing to do. So just be aware of that kind of, that isn't a positive thing to do, and it's actually negative. So try to avoid it. And instead of that, rejoice in virtue. So that's actually a whole practice in itself. When there's good deeds that are done by other people or also by ourselves, or good qualities that we notice in people, being kind-hearted, being generous, and so on, to feel happy about that, to rejoice. It's an antidote to jealousy, because jealousy can sometimes come up when you see somebody doing good things or being super generous and you're kind of stingy by comparison. So we may feel jealous, and that's not good. That's actually quite negative. So initially, it may take some effort. It may be a little artificial, like just saying it, but not really feeling it. But still, the more we try to feel good about good deeds and good qualities, the more it will become natural, because it feels good. You get this immediate good feeling rather than jealousy, which is really kind of painful. So that's a good thing to do. Practice rejoicing in others' good deeds and good qualities, but also in our own. That's important too, because I don't know about you, but I see myself sometimes disparaging the quality of my practice. Oh, I didn't do that meditation very well. My mind was wandering. I fell asleep. Oh yeah, I gave a donation, but I didn't really give that much. And kind of putting down yourself and your good deeds and your good qualities. And that's not helpful, because if we keep doing that, eventually you may get discouraged and just, lose heart and not feel like doing that anymore. Whereas rejoicing, it's not the same as gloating, and, look at me, I'm so great. It's not that, but just, that was a good thing to do. That was virtuous. It's going to bring benefit to myself in the future and hopefully to others as well. But just that intelligent recognition that something we did was good, was virtuous. And so then it's like giving ourselves encouragement to keep doing that and do more. So, rejoice in the right things, not in the wrong things. And another question that was sent in says, all of our goods are tainted with the pain of others, from unfair labor to human trafficking and environmental destruction. There is no clean way to live. What daily practice would me recommend for this general regret of living in this tainted world? Yeah, complex. I wonder if that's true, that all goods Yeah, I suppose if you really investigate, you can find, yeah, traces of pain, suffering of others involved in the things that we acquire and use and enjoy and so on. I don't know if that's something new, though. I mean, if you look in human history, history in this world, you know, I think that's always been the case. In the past, there was slavery, there were serfs, yeah. So, yeah, now it's just maybe at a larger scale, but we have more people in the world as well. So I think it is good to have that awareness that, yeah, people and animals um, go through suffering for many, if not all, of the things that we have and use and enjoy. But that, you know, we shouldn't feel guilty. I don't think that's helpful to feel guilty about that. It's not really our fault. But it's not that we made them suffer. We wanted them to suffer. It's just the situation that we're in. And in fact, in Buddhism, we have this whole explanation of what we call samsara, or cyclic existence, which is the situation that we are in until we attain nirvana or enlightenment. And so it's the situation of all living beings, all sentient beings in samsara. And Buddhism explains much more instances of suffering and problems and painful or unsatisfactory situations than most people are aware of. Like most of us are just aware of the really gross, coarse levels of suffering, like poverty, homelessness, human trafficking, and so on. But Buddhism talks about more subtle types of suffering and problems, such as just the fact that our minds are not free, but are kind of imprisoned by karma and afflictions. We always have karma and afflictions in our mind that prevent us from really enjoying happiness and peace and freedom. So that's true for the billionaires, for the gods in heaven, you know, the devas. They're still afflicted by that kind of problem. And we're advised to contemplate all these different types of suffering and unsatisfactoriness and problems, not to become depressed, of course, that's not helpful, but to get inspired to do something about it, to get moved, you know, let's do what we can. And that can take the form of helping others as much as we can in this life, but that will be limited. We're just one person, one head, two arms, two legs. So what we're able to do to help others will be limited. Still good to do, but we also recognize the importance of working on our mind so that we overcome our limitations and attain higher states, realizations up to enlightenment. And the higher we go on the path, the more we will be able to help others. You know, we'll have fewer limitations, more abilities, more skills and qualities that we can use to help others. So we put in, you know, those of us following the Buddhist path put a lot of our energy into developing ourselves, developing our Buddha potential, with the aim of helping others, with that attitude of bodhicitta, wanting to help all living beings. So, yeah, so that would be the Buddhist answer to this question. You know, what can we do on a daily basis? What daily practice can we do? Is cultivating bodhicitta, love and compassion, and then doing our best to live our lives in accordance with that. And also, many of the practices we do, I think that's included in the Vajrasattva practice. I don't know how it's been guided here, but you know, the Shakyamuni Buddha practice, which is done every day here in the Abbey, we're advised to imagine ourselves surrounded by all sentient beings, that we're not just sitting there alone doing this practice, but we imagine all other sentient beings sitting with us, doing the practice with us, and getting the benefit of the practice with us. So that's something else you could do, whatever practice you're doing on a daily basis. Imagine, having this wish that all beings could do it with you and purify themselves and transform themselves and develop their potential for genuine peace and happiness. So I hope that answers that question. But also, like, when we have meals, there are these recitations and contemplations that we do to recall other beings who have made it possible for us to have this food, and thinking that we're eating this food to have energy, not just for pleasure, but to have energy to continue our practice to benefit others. There's lots of little things that we can do during the day that will help us keep in mind other beings, how we are dependent on them, how they provide us with the things we use and enjoy, and wanting to repay their kindness. So the prayer book, the blue prayer book, which contains lots of different prayers and recitations, there are these places where there are recitations you can use to cultivate that kind of attitude and do them throughout the day. And then yesterday, Yangchen asked a couple of questions, and I was thinking more about that, particularly the question about composing your own prayers. And I hope I didn't make it sound like that's a no-no, that, only Buddha can compose prayers. That isn't true, in fact, because many of the prayers in the prayer books we use here were not composed by the Buddha. They were composed by Lama Tsongkhapa or Shantideva. So Indian masters, Tibetan masters have written prayers and practices that involve visualizations and so on. And so, I mean, it is fine if we want to compose our own prayers and practices. However, it's best if we do that on the basis of a good, sound understanding of the path. Yeah, so a prayer composed by Lama Tsongkhapa or by the Dalai Lama, that's on the basis of a really thorough understanding of the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist path, the goal of enlightenment we're trying to achieve, what that means, how we get there. And so having that knowledge and also experience, having really contemplated and meditated on this path, then on the basis of that, composing a prayer or a practice will be quite probably very beneficial. Whereas if someone like me were to just make up a prayer or a practice, maybe, I don't know how beneficial it would be, maybe some benefit, but, the more knowledge we have and experience we have of the teachings and the path and the practice, then the more effective and beneficial will be any prayers or practices that we compose. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it is fine if you want to compose your prayers and practices, and even if maybe in the beginning, because of your lack of full knowledge of the path and the teachings, maybe you make some mistakes, but you can always correct those later. You can come back and look at that and think, oh, I was wrong about that, so cross that out and change it. So that's fine to do, because in that way it's kind of coming from your heart. It's coming from, your understanding and your experience. And of course, that's something that changes and grows as we go along. And so prayers and practices you may do later on will be more kind of genuine and effective. But I just feel for myself, I like to rely on prayers and practices that were composed by the Buddha or beings like Lama Tsongkhapa or the Dalai Lama, who really have a lot of knowledge and experience. And I feel, kind of connecting with those is going to be really helpful for me to progress along the path. Okay, so this morning I not much time left, but yeah, just to talk about the mind, because as you've heard a number of times in this retreat, the mind plays a major role in our karma, the karma that we create. And I don't know, all of you have studied much about Buddhism. I know some have, but some might be relatively new. So I thought to just talk a little bit about the mind. So when we talk about mind in Buddhism, we're not talking about the brain. It's not this physical organ inside of our head, but rather mind in Buddhism is said to be non-physical, non-material. So it's not made of atoms or particles or any of those things. I sometimes use the word energy, but that's also very vague, just to call it a non-physical energy. But anyway, it's something that exists but isn't physical. So we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't. The instruments that scientists have created so far aren't actually able to detect the mind, because they can only detect physical phenomena. They can check the brain and they can see what's going on in the brain, but the brain isn't the mind, and our experiences are not really created by our brain. So it's something non-physical, and it has the ability to know, to experience. That's what mind does. That's its function, is to know, to experience. And knowing and experience can happen in different ways. For example, our senses. So seeing and hearing and smelling, tasting, touching. We have 5 senses, and those are happening all the time. So when we are having those kinds of experiences, that's actually our mind. It's our mind that is seeing and hearing and smelling and so on. And then we also have, according to Buddhism, a 6th sense, which is called a mental consciousness or mental sense. And that includes thoughts, memories, dreams, emotions. So that's quite a big part of our experience, right? I don't know about you. I have thoughts going on all the time in my mind. And even when we fall asleep, then our mind comes up with, dreams, incredible, complex, crazy things. So that's going on like 24 hours a day, never stops. But that's also mind. So all those types of experiences are part of our mind as well. So mind is very rich, very vast, very, complex. And it is going on 24/7. It never stops. Even when we're in deep sleep, like there are times when we don't dream, but we just have this very deep state of sleep. What's that called? Dreamless sleep, or anyway, you know that one. Even then, our mind is still active. There's still something happening in our mind, even if it's just darkness. But mind never stops. Even a person in a coma, deep state of unconsciousness, their mind, they still have mind, and their mind is still active, experiencing something. So it never stops, 24/7. It's always experiencing something, and it's constantly changing. Mind is compared to a kind of like a river or a stream that's always moving, always changing, never the same from one moment to the next. So mind is a big subject in Buddhism, and we have like whole studies, books just about the mind and the different aspects of the mind, different types of mind. Quite fascinating. Also, different levels of the mind. There's more coarse, gross levels and more subtle levels, and down to the most subtle level of mind, which is called the clear light mind. So, but in the context of what we're doing here, talking about karma and purification of karma, it's helpful to know that certain aspects of our mind, what we normally call afflictions or afflictive emotions or delusions, these are the things that lie behind our doing of actions that are negative and that lead to suffering. And so it's helpful to know about those and how to start working on those. Because if we can reduce it's not easy to do, but if we can reduce those aspects of our mind, then that's a way of reducing our negative karma, the negative karma that we create. And we also have lots of aspects of our mind that are positive, that are virtuous. And if we can build those up, grow those, nourish those, increase those, then we'll be able to create more good karma, more virtuous karma. So one way of explaining the mind is, there's certain aspects of the mind that are non-virtuous or negative, or different terms we can use for them, but those are the ones that lead to problems and suffering. And then other aspects of the mind are positive and virtuous, and those are the ones that lead to happiness. So it's good to know something about those so we can work on decreasing the negative ones, increasing the positive ones. So for the negative ones, there's lots of those, but they say the three main ones are called the three poisons. They were mentioned yesterday. When we do a negative action, if one of the three poisons is involved in our attitude, then that's one of the factors making an action complete. So the three poisons are greed, also called attachment, desire, craving, different terms, and then anger or hatred, and ignorance. So these are in our, you may wonder, why do I have these in my mind? Where do they come from? I don't want them. I don't want them there. Why do they have to be there? Well, according to Buddhism, we've had them in our minds forever. Our minds have actually been existing forever without beginning. That's a difficult thing to understand and accept. But anyway, that's what the Buddha taught. There's no beginning to our mind, and also no beginning to our situation in samsara. We've been in samsara, dying and being reborn over and over and over again, forever, without beginning. So don't worry about that. It's too hard to figure it out. But anyway, you'll blow your mind. You'll blow a fuse. But anyway, so even from the time we're born in this lifetime, we already have in our mind these afflicted states. So we didn't get them from our parents. We can't blame them, or God, or the government, or whatever. They came with us, part of the package from past lives. But the good news is they're not permanent, and they're not there all the time. And we can see that for ourselves. Yeah, we just watch our mind, become aware of our experience. We can see, yeah, sometimes I'm angry, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I have the opposite state of mind. I feel really loving and caring and open and joyful. So we, getting to know our mind, we can see that these afflicted states, these delusions, come and go. They're not permanent, they're not fixed. So, and as I did mention the other day, they are adventitious, meaning they're not going to be there forever. They're not like permanent fixtures in our mind that can never be eliminated. Buddha was able to eliminate them. Many other followers of this path have been able to eliminate them. So they can be eliminated. They're not forever. Even though they've been there forever, they won't be there forever in the future. But we do have to do something. They're not going to go away by themselves. So we do have to put some effort into working on them. So to get rid of the 3 poisons and the other afflictions in the mind, what is needed is the realization of emptiness. Emptiness is the true nature, the actual way that everything exists. And it's actually our lack of awareness of that is why we have all these other afflictions and other problems. Yeah, they're all based on ignorance about the true nature of things. And so it is possible to slowly, gradually develop an understanding of emptiness through listening to teachings and studying, discussing with teachers and other practitioners, meditating on, finally getting a realization of emptiness. The initial realization of emptiness that we have is a conceptual one. That's the only way we can get an understanding of emptiness. It's not something we can see with our eyes or with any of our senses. So we have to develop a conceptual or intellectual understanding of emptiness. But then with continued meditation on that, continuing to meditate on that understanding that we have, it eventually becomes what's called a direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. That means we're seeing emptiness directly with our mind. Again, not with our eyes, but with our mind. Our mental consciousness is seeing emptiness directly. And I don't know what that's like. I'm not there, so don't think I'm talking from experience, but it sounds pretty amazing. And very powerful. So that mental state, that direct non-conceptual realization of emptiness is like kind of like an atom bomb or hydrogen bomb. It's what can eliminate the afflictions. But it's not that all the afflictions suddenly go away all at once, but rather gradually over time. With that direct realization of emptiness, we sort of gradually peel away the layers of the afflictions and finally get to the point where they're gone altogether. So that's a long process for most people. It takes time, and so we can't expect that's going to happen anytime soon. But in the meantime, there are things we can do to reduce the afflictive emotions, to manage them. So they'll still be coming up in our mind. There'll still be anger, irritation, greed, selfishness, pride, jealousy. These things will still pop up in our mind, even if we recognize these are afflicted states of mind. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to be this way, but they still come up. So that's normal. That's completely normal because of habit. Yeah, we are creatures of habit. And so because we've had those experiences so many times before, not just in this life, but many, many lives. And so, yeah, they just keep coming up. But even when they do come up, there are things we can do to manage them and reduce them. And also, when you get good at this, even if something like anger comes up in your mind, you can recognize it and say, oh, that's anger. I don't want to get involved in that. And you can work on your mind, transform it so that instead of being angry at that person, you can feel something more positive: compassion, patience, forgiveness, love, wanting to reach out and help them. It takes some effort, but it's doable. And once you get some experience of that, you want to keep doing it because it feels so much better. It's so much better for yourself, but also better for others. Yeah, because anger can lead to so much suffering, so many problems for everybody. So those are things that we can do, and there's lots of methods, antidotes, in the Buddhist teachings for how we can work with our afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions. So a regular practice of meditation is helpful, very, very helpful, to be able to have a more clear state of mind so that you can recognize them, because otherwise they can you can be totally caught up in anger before you even realize it, or maybe you don't even realize it until the next day. Oh, really, I got really angry yesterday. So it's like we need to be able to recognize these disturbing emotions when they come up, and try to deal with them before they don't completely take over, and we're all acting them out. And so regular practice of meditation and the cultivation of mindfulness in the sense of noticing what's going on, being mindful of our thoughts, our feelings, what's happening in our mind, that's really, really helpful. So that itself can take some time. I remember once meeting a woman who said, I think she'd been learning Buddhism for maybe a few years, and she said, in the past, she would get angry and wouldn't realize it until maybe a month later. And then slowly with, learning Buddhism and meditation, that time got shorter. She'd realize it a week later, 1 day later, 1 hour later. And pretty soon she got to the point where she could see it while it was happening. That was already a big step. And then ideally, we recognize something like anger while it's bubbling up, while it's starting to come up, because then it's easier to deal with it. Once you're already completely enraged, it's harder to deal with it. But if you can see it start to come, then you can do something, even if it's just going out of the room, going to the bathroom. I don't want to blow up at, this person. So that's the ideal thing, is to be able to notice it when it's first coming up in the mind. And at that time, it's still like just a little sprout. And so you can deal with it more easily than later. So that's something that takes time. So we do need patience with ourselves, perseverance, don't give up if, you don't have results that you expected right away. It's also helpful to study because, the Buddhist teachings, Buddhist scriptures provide a lot of information that can help us be more aware of our thoughts, our experiences, and which ones are helpful, which ones are not. And also because I say, there's lots of different antidotes or methods that we can use. And I think that's good because some will be more applicable to some people and not to others. Yeah. So some antidotes you might think, you don't even want to try it. It doesn't interest you. Whereas another one might think, oh yeah, that sounds great. I want to use that. I want to try that. So different antidotes work for different people. And also at different times. Yeah. I find in my own case, I'll try different antidotes and some of them don't work. And then finally I try one and that was it. That was the right one at that time. So just to talk about a few of the antidotes, I'll start with anger, because I think anger is the most destructive of the emotions. It's what lies behind war and violence, terrorism, murder. I mean, all these awful things that people do to other people, to animals, to the environment. A lot of them are due to anger. And I'm sure we've all had experiences in our life of getting anger and losing control and doing things that we feel a lot of regret over, that were harmful to others, harmed relationships, and so on. And so that's actually one thing that's really helpful, is to spend some time contemplating the disadvantages of anger, because not everyone is convinced that anger is harmful. Or they might think, yeah, in some situations it's harmful, but in other situations it's helpful. It's a good thing. You know, like people sometimes say, anger gives me a lot of energy and then I can get things done. Or it gives me energy to go out and protest, or, you know, make changes that need to be changed. So that's true in a way. It does give energy. However, sometimes that energy is kind of chaotic. And because, you know, the nature of anger, as well as other disturbing emotions, just the way they're described in Buddhism, they disturb the mind. They make our mind disturbed, agitated, not peaceful. And so it can sometimes be very hard to think clearly and rationally when you're angry. Yeah. And so you might think of solutions, things to do, but they may not be very wise or very intelligent. They might actually make things worse rather than better. Like just one thing, I heard once, there was some animal activists somewhere in the Midwest, and there was a mink farm, a farm where they were raising minks for mink coats. And so these people went into the farm and opened all the cages and let the minks out. And apparently this is really bad for the environment, because is that right? Those creatures are quite destructive and aggressive, and I don't know. It's like, so they could endanger other species in that area. So okay, they meant well, you know, they didn't like the idea of these animals being raised and then killed for their fur. But what they did, you know, in response to that wasn't so intelligent. So that's just one example. But I think, you know, there's lots of examples of that where people, they want to do something good to protest some injustice or some wrong, but what they do may not be very helpful or intelligent, and may even be more destructive, and also sometimes creating bad karma. Like, you know, cases of what is it? People who are against abortion, blowing up an abortion clinic or killing doctors who perform abortions. Well, I mean, wait a minute, you're concerned about life. You want to protect life, but what are you doing? So, yeah, so this is just what can happen sometimes when we're angry. And even if we feel right, you know, and wanting to address some wrong, yeah, anger can lead us to do things that aren't so helpful. So it's better to be able to work on our minds so that we can reduce the anger and restore our mind to a place where it's able to think clearly and rationally, intelligently, and come up with solutions that are constructive rather than destructive. Just, yeah, one example of that, a friend told me there was a meeting of Nobel Peace Prize laureates, and the Dalai Lama is one of those. And so there was a meeting of him and others, and I think he was giving a talk about anger and saying, "Oh, anger is destructive; it never does anything helpful." And one of the other Peace Prize laureates, you know, got up afterwards and said, "I'm sorry, Your Holiness, but I don't agree with you." And it was a woman who, I forget her name, but she started this organization to end landmines, to get rid of landmines. And she said, if I hadn't gotten angry about all these landmines left in the ground that are causing death and injury and horrible things, I wouldn't have done the work that I did. So the initial spark for her work was anger. She was angry, and it's understandable, you know. People leave these landmines in the earth, and then little kids are out playing and they get themselves blown up, killed, or, you know, maimed for life. Farmers. So it's horrible. But she used that anger as a spark to initiate this organization that went in and, well, I guess they're still working. It's not finished, but, you know, going into places where there are landmines and removing them so that they stop causing this horrible. So that's the ideal thing. Even if we do feel angry about some injustice or something that's going on that's really wrong, and we want to change that, but reduce the anger, clear the anger out of the mind, and then think, okay, what will be a viable, constructive, helpful response to this that can deal with this problem, rather than just acting out of anger. Venerable Punso?
So someone online is asking, do you have any advice for how to connect with someone who is disappointed when I am not angry on their behalf? They think anger means care, and if I'm not angry, I don't care.
Oh, sounds like other people have experienced that too. Yeah, that's difficult. Any ideas? I don't think I've been in a situation like that. So nothing pops up in my mind. I mean, the ideal thing, I think, would be to try to help this person understand that just because I'm not angry doesn't mean I don't care. So if you could try to find a way to assure them that you do care, but you don't think anger is a helpful response, and, you know, explain that.
I think it's helpful what I did. I experienced that, and I listened to that person, and I told her, but I can't expect when you use certain words that I don't accept. So I give her some time, or gave her some time. I listened, and then she said thank you afterwards. And so over the months, I observed she had that habit of getting angry and wanted to get me into it. And then over the time, I observed that she calmed down. She doesn't do it anymore. So, yeah.
What's your name? Right. Okay.
I've had experience with this too, of someone being upset that I don't feel a certain way. And I don't remember where I heard of it, but the book Nonviolent Communication really speaks to me on this. When I can share vulnerably with the person that I see the same thing that they're experiencing, whether that's they want me to be mad about something that happened, some external event, if I can at least say, yeah, I see that happened, and I don't necessarily feel angry, but I feel a lot of compassion or sadness or care for you or whoever else was affected by that. And, you know, I'm needing, instead of being angry, some way to express that compassion in a constructive manner, and asking them to try and contemplate that might be useful. You know, the four aspects in nonviolent communication are sharing your observations, your feelings, your needs, and then making a request or sensing those in the other person and asking them, so you're feeling angry, maybe because you need to know that you matter or that something important is going on. That might be helpful.
Yeah, people here use nonviolent communication as well. So that might be something to look into with your friend or whoever it is that you have this problem with, to look into nonviolent communication. Because, yeah, maybe I haven't studied it myself, but sometimes because of a person's background, their family and community that they grew up in, often they associate anger with, you know, good communication and care and so on. So it could be affected by their learning, their experience, their conditioning, and so on. And so, yeah, a lot of people find it quite wonderful to learn there are other ways to communicate, other ways to relate to people besides anger, something they maybe never experienced before, never learned before. So that could be very helpful. Yeah, anger is a huge, you know, dealing with anger, and also in our relationships with other people, learning how to deal with people, communicate with people, and so on in ways that are not just angry. And so, I don't know, for me, it's been quite a journey with anger, because I grew up in a family where there was anger, sometimes a little bit violent. And my response to that was to shut down. You know, when I would observe anger in others, then I would think, oh, that's horrible. I don't want to be like that. And I would just, you know, so I learned to suppress my anger. I did have anger, and I think I didn't really acknowledge it. Yeah, but I suppressed it. So for many, many years, even after becoming a Buddhist, I was in that mode of suppressing anger, and even not always recognizing it, or not always willing to recognize it in myself. So it was quite a few years before I got to the point where I could emerge from that shell and acknowledge I do have anger. And that's so important, because if we don't acknowledge it, we can't work on it. It doesn't really go away by itself. It just stays inside, and it might build up and even lead to things like illness, or even having a mental breakdown. So it is important to acknowledge the existence of anger, you know, observe it, recognize it, acknowledge, don't suppress. Suppression doesn't help. But on the other hand, you know, the other sort of problem is just getting caught up in it and then acting it out in our behavior, in our actions, our speech, and so on. So that's also not helpful, because then that can lead to problems. You can hurt other people, and then karmically creating bad karma. So we don't want to go to that extent. So I think the Buddhist way is kind of a middle way between suppression on the one hand and acting out on the other hand. The Buddhist way would be to, you know, using mindfulness and introspection to be aware of the presence of anger in the mind, also be aware of the dangers if you don't handle it carefully, like with fire or with, you know, a stick of dynamite. You have to handle it carefully. And then use different methods, different techniques to manage the anger. And yeah, so some of those, I'll just mention a few that could be used. It's said that loving kindness is the best antidote. That's like the opposite state of mind, because anger usually involves the desire to hurt. You know, there's this wish to hurt, even if it's just with words or with thoughts, you know, but you kind of want to hurt the other person. So loving kindness is the opposite. The opposite to that, loving kindness is the wish to help, to benefit. So if you're very familiar with loving kindness, you've been practicing that, you're able to, you know, switch into that mode, then that's great. But that may be difficult unless you're super familiar with loving kindness. But even to just use the words, I met one woman who her job involved answering the phone. She worked for a company, and clients or customers would call in, and often complain. They were, something wasn't working. They were unhappy. They were complaining. And she said when she heard the tone of voice and understood they were angry, that would trigger her anger. So she'd get angry too. And then they'd have this, not very pleasant conversation. And so once she learned about loving kindness, where we, one way of generating loving kindness is to use words like the prayer at the beginning. We say, may all beings have happiness. So you can do that with specific, may this person have happiness, may that person have happiness, and so on. And so, so she started using that in her work. So if she heard this anger in the other person's voice, she would just, in her mind, say, may you be happy, may you be happy, may you be happy. And she said it really helped her to stay calm. It helped her to not react with anger. And she was able to stay calm. And she noticed that if she could stay calm, not angry, the other person would calm down too. So even if it's not a genuine, full-fledged feeling of loving kindness, but just to bring that thought to mind, may this person be happy, that itself can help to keep our mind calm and not get so reactive. And then karma. Karma, remembering karma, that can be really helpful too. If we, there's different things we could think. One would be, we usually get angry because something is happening that we don't want or we don't like somebody may be treating us a way we don't like or doing something we don't like. And so if we accept karma, then we can bring that in and say, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Why is this person doing this to me? Maybe I created the karma. Maybe I did something. And we could even recall something from this very life. Maybe we did something to annoy that person, to hurt that person, to upset that person. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. And if we can't think of anything from this life, if we accept karma and rebirth, then we can think, okay, in a past life, I may have harmed this person or harmed somebody else, and this is my karma coming back. I created the karma to have this experience. And then that can lead to thinking, okay, now I know, now I know what is the karmic result of that kind of behavior. Yeah. And I don't want this to keep happening to me. So I really have to make sure I don't create that karma anymore. This was really helpful to me in one situation where somebody was being really nasty to me, and it was quite painful. And I tried all kinds of different methods, but this one really helped because I didn't have to think very far. I could think of my childhood where I was often very nasty to my younger siblings, sometimes to my friends. I thought, oh, I treated other people like this, and now I'm on the receiving end of that. And so that helped me calm down, but also it helped me realize, I thought, oh, now I know what it's like to be treated that way. And I don't ever want to do this to anybody. I don't want to make anybody else feel this way. So it really came from my heart, this kind of compassion for sentient beings. And I don't want to make them suffer like this. So I made this really strong determination. I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to be nasty to anybody again. I hope I can keep it. And, but yeah, so thinking in terms of karma was very, very helpful, very effective in that situation. And it can really help us to have a stronger determination to avoid negative karma and create good karma instead. It may take a while, to contemplate these points and get to that kind of conclusion, but it's helpful, and that is helpful to reduce the anger and to transform that situation into something constructive, something learning situation. And then another thing that's helpful is to try to understand the other person. put yourself in their shoes, understand what's going on with them. If someone is doing something annoying or even harmful, it's probably they're probably coming from a place of suffering. They're probably not happy, not in a good state of mind. Because when people are happy and feeling good, they don't do awful things. Yeah, you can see that for ourselves. When we do awful things, it's usually because we're miserable, we're in pain, unhappy about things. So contemplate that and see if you can understand what's going on with this person. Maybe they had bad things happen to them when they were a child, or maybe just yesterday or 1 hour ago. Yeah, something happened that set them off, that put them into this bad state. And that's why they're behaving the way they are. And if we can understand that, then our mind will be more likely to feel like helping them. We want to kind of reach out and help them rather than, give them more things to be unhappy about. So that can be very helpful. Also, one other thing is, this is mentioned in Shantideva's text, and I found it really helpful. Anger is more likely to arise in our mind when our mind is already in a bad state, when we're feeling grumpy, dissatisfied, yeah, unhappy about things. And so it's good to, look after your mind, be aware of your mind. And if you do notice your mind is in a kind of grumpy state, an unhappy state, try to do something about that. Because if you let that continue, and it might build up more and more, then that's like a fertile field for anger to pop up. So yeah, take care of your mind. Try to keep your mind positive and in a good state as much as you can. Do things, to get yourself out of an unhappy state. And there's, again, lots of methods for doing that in Buddhism. Like remembering our good fortune, having the life that we have, the opportunities that we have, even just having food to eat, even just being alive. There's plenty of things to feel good about, to be happy about. And that can really change your mind from being grumpy and bad-tempered to more positive. Also, impermanence. I really find impermanence very, very helpful. This simply means that things are subject to change. They're not fixed and permanent, frozen. So anger is something that comes and goes in the mind. It's not always there, always the same. It arises because of certain causes and conditions, and it may last a while. Even if you don't do anything to change it, it'll eventually go away. So just to understand the impermanent nature of anger, as well as the impermanent nature of the situation that you're maybe upset about, that's also not permanent. It's not going to be like that forever. So it just makes things lighter. It just gives you a sense of lightness rather than heaviness, and things being very solid and concrete. So those are just a few. There's others as well, things that we can do with anger. And also in, I think it's volume 3, Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha Nature. There's a whole section in there about the afflictions, all the different afflictions, and also remedies or countermeasures, I think they're called countermeasures, things we can do to manage our afflictive states of mind. Okay, then at attachment, this is what we feel. It can be towards people or other beings. It could be towards material things, it can be towards ourself, our body. It can be towards qualities like knowledge, experiences, status. So there's, great variety of things we can get attached to. And what happens with attachment is we perceive this object, a person or some other object, and it seems to be something interesting, attractive. We kind of have a good feeling towards it. But what happens in our mind is our mind tends to exaggerate, to blow up the good qualities of the object, and maybe start to fantasize. Oh, if I had that, if I could be with that person, if I had that object, if I went to that place, I would be so happy, have all these wonderful experiences, live happily ever after. So our mind can get carried away with these fantasies. And this can happen like without our control, without our conscious manipulation. It's just the mind just does it, Again, it's habit. It's happened so many times before, so it just keeps happening again and again. And so then attachment is this kind of grasping at or clinging to, wanting that, wanting to be close to it, to keep it with us as much as possible. So it's like we see that object as a source of happiness. We want happiness, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with wanting to be happy, but we tend to think this is going to make me happy. If I have this, I will be happy. And so we get really clingy to it. And that can lead to all kinds of problems. We don't always get what we want, for one thing. And then there's this huge disappointment that, as Shantideva says, even when we get what we want, after a while, we may be dissatisfied. Especially, things like cars and phones. They're always making new ones, better ones, improved ones, more beautiful ones. And so, the one we bought last year is no longer so interesting. We want the new one. And so, following attachment. The Buddha said, following attachment, desire is like drinking salt water. You don't get satisfied. You just get more thirsty, wanting more and more and more and more. And so the best thing is to recognize that state of mind and deal with it. Although it's said to be more difficult than anger. They say anger and other afflictions are kind of like dust or dirt that collects on the surface of a cloth. You can just kind of brush it off. But attachment is like oil, butter. It sinks into the cloth, and you have to scrub and scrub and scrub to get rid of it. So it's hard to, detach ourselves from attachment. And detaching from attachment doesn't mean throwing away our things, cutting ourselves off from our friends. It's not that. It's changing our mind, changing our attitude, so we can continue having the friends that we have and the things that we have. Maybe we can reduce some, but mainly changing our attitude, learning to be less attached. So one way to do that is, I think, very helpful way is to meditate on impermanence, because it's the nature of things that they change, they don't stay the same, they get older, and in most cases, eventually they go out of existence. People die, cars break down, phones break down, or get run over by a car, or whatever. I mean, things don't last. And attachment wants things to last. It's like, I want this to always be here with me and always the same, never change, never get old and scratched and broken. That's what we want. And it's not possible. Yeah, it's asking for the impossible. And so, so it takes time, but to contemplate the impermanent nature of things, that it's just the nature of everything, our bodies, other people's bodies, all the material things in the world itself. Yeah, they're their very nature is that they're changing all the time and getting older, more decrepit, and eventually they won't be there anymore. So initially we may feel some resistance. We don't really want to think that way, but that's because of attachment. Attachment is like fairy tale thinking, you know, the prince and princess meet and live happily ever after. But I mean, does that ever happen, really? No. I mean, people do sometimes, you know, remain together until the end of their lives and love each other and care for each other. But, you know, sooner or later, one's going to die, the other's going to die, both die. Yeah, it's just not possible to have happily ever after. And so, yeah, it's helpful to contemplate this and slowly wrap our mind around it, get it into our heads that that's the nature of things. So that is very helpful for overcoming attachment, to just remind ourselves it's not going to be there forever. I'm not going to be here forever, too. Yeah. I mean, that's a big topic of contemplation in Buddhism, contemplating death and dying. This is going to happen to every single one of us. And Buddha said, really, really important to meditate on that, come to accept that. And that is very, very helpful to reduce our attachment because we see it just doesn't make sense. And also the pleasure, the happiness we experience with our objects of attachment, that's impermanent too. That may be a little subtler, harder to recognize. But if we pay attention to our experience, then we can see that, you know, like there are times when you're happy with that person or eating that food or drinking that drink or looking at that object, but other times not. Sometimes you just feel indifferent. Sometimes you may even feel annoyed. Right? So the pleasure, the happiness, the good feelings that we get with an object that we're attached to, those are also, I think, impermanent. Yeah. They also change, subject to change. And yeah, in Buddhism, there's a whole explanation of, you know, where happiness really comes from. Because we tend to be quite deluded. We tend to think this makes me happy. My happiness comes from this or that person or that puppy or whatever. And that's not true. And that's what fuels the attachment. Yeah, that mistaken notion. This makes me happy. I need this to be happy. I can't be happy without that. This is what our mind is saying. We need to check that. Is that true? Yeah. Are there times when I'm happy, even if that isn't there? I'm sure there are. Yeah. But you know, this is, I think people do have this kind of notion. It's in the songs as well, you know, the love songs. I can't be happy without you. If you leave me, I will be never happy again. I don't know. I haven't listened to those kind of songs for a long time, but when I was a kid, a kid and a teenager, my ear glued to the radio, you know, these are the kind of lyrics they have. Yeah, so we need to investigate. Is that really true? Yeah. But yeah, so if people believe that, then when that loved one does leave or die, go away, whatever, then they think, oh, I can't be happy. But if they check carefully, they probably recognize, well, yeah, I actually can be happy in other situations with other people. It's not impossible. So we need to check what our mind is saying. Yeah, what kind of thoughts, what kind of messages, what kind of stories are going on in our mind, and ask ourselves, is it true? Yeah. Not everything that our mind says is true. we We shouldn't have that illusion. Yeah. A lot of the things going on in our mind, a lot of the thoughts, a lot of the stories are not true. So good to investigate that. So those are, yeah, some of the things to deal with, to use for anger and attachment. Any questions? If there's some other disturbing emotion you'd like to hear about, I can. Oh, sorry, the microphone.
So you were sharing on the antidotes to anger, and then remembering our good fortune, anger is impermanent. And then at the end of that section, you said something has stuff on how to deal with afflicted states of mind.
Sorry, I didn't.
There was like a book.
Say it a little slower.
Okay. So you were sharing on the antidotes
yeah, just
of
the last
anger.
part. What
and then you
I
said there was some book or something that has stuff on how to deal with afflicted states of mind.
Oh no, volume 3. Yeah, so it's one of these volumes that Venerable Children has put together with Dalai Lama's teachings. So volume 3, it's called Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha Nature. So in that book, there's a whole explanation of samsara and extensive explanation of the Four Truths. And yeah, in that book, there's several chapters, I think, on afflictions, the different afflictions, and also countermeasures. I think in that book it's called Countermeasures, meaning antidotes, things you can do about the afflictions. So that's the book. I think it should be in the book nook downstairs.
We got into a discussion yesterday afternoon that I'm not sure the bottom line was clear. So since we have the space, I wonder if you can talk about the relationship between afflictions and the antidotes, and then Vajrasattva practice and what we purify, and what's what there.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about that myself, because in the practice, I think it says, you imagine not just the negative karma, but does it say? Yeah, like page 39, purification of body, your afflictions and negativities in general. Yeah, you're getting rid of those. So I'm not really sure if doing Vajrasattva really does clear away afflictions. I have that question myself, because like I said, the the only thing that can completely get rid of the afflictions is the realization of emptiness. But I think, yeah, definitely doing Vajrasattva practice or other kinds of purification practice, if we bring to mind, oh, I got angry and did this and that, and I really regret that, and I really want to work on our anger. So I think that, yeah, it would have the effect of reducing the anger, as well as the actions that we did, actions of body, speech, and mind we did under the influence of anger. So I would think it's definitely going to be reduced. But I guess because I have that doubt, because normally when they teach a purification practice like Vajrasattva, the 4 opponent powers, mainly talking in terms of karma, negative karma. But maybe it's because afflictions are more subtle, so we have to at least start with the more coarse things that need to be purified, like our actions, body, and speech. The afflictions are more like what lies behind those. Sorry? We will also our karma. I mean, we reduce our karma, but it's not that, literally all of the bad karma we've ever created gets washed away. Otherwise then you would think, well, doing Vajrasattva practice once is enough. All that karma is gone forever. I don't have to do this again. Okay, maybe I'll do another negative action. I have to purify that. But it's just not realistic to take it too literally and think one session of Vajrasattva practice is going to clear out all that negativity forever. So that's why we have to do it again and again, especially in a retreat situation.
I was thinking more about that because this came up yesterday, and thinking like, what is wrong with thinking about this in the sense of what are the 4 parts of a complete karma? I mean, you just taught on that the other day, the basis, the attitude, the performance, and the completion. So when we think about the action, it's involving all of those things. So one part of that is the affliction. So it's just a component in a sense. I mean, might be one way to think of this.
Yeah. The microphone will travel in your direction.
Thank you. Thank you for this weekend. I've received a lot of healing and nourishment. I guess a couple of practical questions. It's my first time spending a large amount of time in with the monastics. What is a blue outfit and a maroon robe? And what is my role and responsibility going home as a lay person? Are there concrete things I should be doing for my practice, like going to online classes or getting these prayer books? And how often are we allowed to visit? Because I too want those recipes.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions. Mainly, what to do after this. That's really important. Yeah, yeah. So we're coming to the end of this weekend, and you've learned a lot. Well, the Abbey does offer the SAFE program. When is the next one starting? Okay, April 8th. There's this online program with, how many modules is it? It's growing. It's up to 10 or 11, but it keeps growing. Huh? 12. Okay. Okay, it's got 12 modules, and you can follow it online, and you're following it with a group of people, other people, and you have a facilitator, one of the monastics or another senior student of the Abbey that's kind of guiding the whole process. So you have things to listen to, read, meditate on, and so that's quite a good program to follow. I think some of the people here have done it or are still doing it. So that's one thing you can do. There's also, the Abbey YouTube channel, which has tons. You could spend 24 hours a day watching videos. Yeah, and often in different categories, different topics that you can listen to. And then if you can do a daily practice, that is helpful. It's sometimes hard for people initially to do it on their own. Some people find it easy. I'm always amazed at that, even without a teacher, they start doing a practice on their own at home. But other people have a hard time doing that. There's this group that meets daily, is it? Kathy's group? Oh, 2 times a day. Yeah, so there's this group started by one of the members, Kathy Elton, and that's been running for years now, and they meet online 2 times a day, morning and evening. So if you have trouble doing practice on your own, you could meet with that group and join them. They'd probably be happy to have you join. And yeah, if you want to bring home the books, the blue book is the more initial one. So that has, lots of prayers and practices. usually what's recommended is the practice of Shakyamuni Buddha, which is in here in the early pages. Yeah, it's called Meditation on the Buddha, page 19. So that contains a practice that you could do on a daily basis. You could also do the Vajrasattva practice if you want to do that. That might be good to do at night. This one would be helpful in the morning, do Vajrasattva at night to clear up the karma during the day. So there's lots of possibilities. And as for visiting, Venerable Samten is I think right now we're going to be in winter retreat, so we won't have visitors until end of March. Is it end of March? That's when it's open again for people to visit. On our website, there's a tab called Resources, and how to take lessons.
On the Abbey's website, on the homepage, there's a tab at the top that says Resources. And in there is the information for how to get in touch with that daily meditation group. And there's also a whole series of how to access a guided meditation on that Buddha practice so that you can hear Venerable Children lead it for a while and learn to teach yourself. And all the prayers are on that too. So if you look at the Resources section, it's there. And then, yeah, the safe information is on that page too. But there's a lot. It's called Daily Online Meditation. Okay, that's what you click.
So thanks for asking that question. I'm sure other people are wondering that as well. You have a question? Ken?
No, just sharing. I always, during the offering to the Buddha, it's also the moment of reflecting on Four Opponent Powers. And I regret on all the actions that I have did or any event. The second one is reliance. And then I actually imagine that if the Buddha is here, the teacher is here, how would he actually teach me on changing my situation or behave differently? The third, when come to offering, and then I recollect on all the painful experience of the person, difficulties that he went through. And then suddenly it developed into precious moment that how I care, how I love. And then that continued into the last moment that I offer it to the Buddha. And then I will not take back because I already offered the Buddha. Then I keep on keeping this precious moment. So I use that as a moment of, and I realized that when I offered this offering, it actually kind of like removing the obstacles to recognize the defilements or the difficulties that I'm working through.
That's very beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, when we do things that are virtuous, like making offerings to the Buddha, then it does have the effect of making our mind more clear and pure. And then, yeah, being able to recognize things we need to work on or overcome or purify. So doing both purification on the one hand and creating virtue or merit on the other hand, they kind of help each other, assist each other. Okay, I think this is the last question.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you have any teachings on the 5 hindrances. I know they're in the Pali Suttas, but I'm not sure if they're popular in Mahayana. And particularly drowsiness, like.
So he's talking about 5 hindrances to single-pointed concentration. I don't think it's as emphasized as much in our tradition as in the Pali tradition, but there are teachings there. I think it's in volume 4, volume 4, following the Buddha's footsteps, that, there's an explanation of those 5 hindrances and how to deal with them. So drowsiness, sleepiness, yeah. things that can help with that are like if you're meditating and you're feeling sleepy, open your eyes. If we have our eyes completely closed, then it's more, like an invitation to go to sleep. So have the eyes open and just look down onto some place in front of you so that you're not looking around. So opening the eyes is helpful. And sitting up straight, if your body is kind of slouched. Try not to have the temperature too warm in the room. If it's too warm, that is conducive for sleepiness. So have it a little bit cool. And it's usually recommended not to meditate right after eating a big meal. Go for a walk first. And in our tradition, they also say, imagine light. Visualize your body filled with light, your head filled with light around you. That can counteract this sleepiness, which is kind of connected with darkness. And if you try those things and it still doesn't work, then it can be helpful to stand up. Maybe you could meditate standing up for a while, or doing some walking meditation for a while, and then come and, sit down again. So those are things that help. And make sure you get enough sleep at night, because, people are often just running and not sleeping well at night, and then they sit down and meditate. So it could be just a lack of sleep, and so make sure you get sufficient sleep. Okay, so let's stop there and dedicate the merit, the positive energy of this session, sharing it with all sentient beings.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Vajrasattva, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Thank you, Venerable Khadro. We'd like to express our thanks.
Huh?
People would like to express their thanks.
Oh,
So
okay.
we'll do a kata ceremony.
Thanks to all of you, and I hope it's been beneficial, and you take something helpful and beneficial home with you after this. And come back.
Manupalaya Vajrasattva Dino Patita Dino Mebhava Sutukayo me boa, Supukayo me boa, Anurakta me boa, Sarasiti me prayasa, Sara karma susane, Siddham Shriyam Kurum Hum, ha 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 Om Bhagavan, Sara Tathagata Vajramame Mutta Vajrabhama Samaya Sapaha Om Pe. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupadaya Vajrasattva Deva Patita Iyo me bhava Sutokaya me bhava Supokaya me bhava Andarakta me bhava Sarasiti me prayasa Sara karma susame Siddham Shriyam Kurum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sara Tathagata Vajramame Mutta Vajrabhava Samaya Sampaha Om Pe. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Madhapalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dio me bhava Sutokayo me bhava Supokayo me bhava Anurakta me bhava Sarasiti me prayasa Sarva karma sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kurum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sara Tathagata Vajramame Mutta Vajrabhava Samaya Sampaha Om Pre. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Madhupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dio me bhava Sutokaya me bhava Supokaya me bhava Anurakta me bhava Sarasiti me prayasa Sara karma sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kurum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sara Tathagata Vajramame Mutta Vajrabhava Samaya Sapaha Om Pe. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Madhupalaya Vajrasattva Denopatita Dio me bhava Sutokaya me bhava Supokaya me bhava Anurakta me bhava Sarasiti me prayasa Sarva karma sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kurum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sara Tathagata Vajramame Mutta Vajrabhava Samaya Sattva Om Pe.
One more. You still have meditation?
Meditation at 11:10, guided in the client room, silent in the meditation hall. And if the residents can, the monastics can just remove the tables you're seating, because we'll set up another dining room table so there's enough seats for everyone to sit at tables at lunch.